It all started when he opened his eyes to someone shaking him, calling him Blair. Confused and groggy, he found himself in a classroom, surrounded by mocking students, with no idea where he was. A girl beside him mentioned Miss Brittany would call him again, and sure enough, she appeared, stunning and fierce. She teased Blair for dozing off in class, then swiftly scolded him, snapping that all he ever did was sleep like math wasn't the fabric of the universe. She told him to get up and solve the problem on the board. With no idea what he was doing, Blair stood there, panicking. Sighing, Miss Brittany let him sit back down, giving him until tomorrow to solve it, his punishment for using her class as a nap spot. The class mocked Blair, calling him brainless. But then, he suddenly began solving the problem with confidence. Miss Brittany, curious, checked the board, her smile vanished. The answer was right. Blair stunned everyone with the correct answer, then casually walked out asking for the restroom. As students buzzed in disbelief, he overheard them saying even Miss Brittany would need hours to solve it. That's when Blair knew he had crossed over. Memories rushed in. Chen Luo, a devoted math teacher, had dozed off during an exam and woke up in another world as Blair, a student known for being hopelessly dumb. In this bizarre world obsessed with math, their level was so basic, it made elementary schoolers back home look like geniuses. Blair saw this world as his chance to shine with real math. Lost in thought, he crashed into a girl who instantly snapped, calling him a leecher. Turns out, he'd embarrassed her before at the freshman ceremony. As she hurled insults, Blair just smirked. Finally, something interesting. Blair teased her fake magic with a goofy act, until a real fireball lit up in her hand. She launched it straight at him, and as heat scorched his face, he realized one thing: he'd been reincarnated into a world with real magic. As Blair wondered what to do if someone hurled a fireball at him in this new world, the furious girl already charged up for round 2, calling him a simp lecher. With a sigh, he bowed and gave an overly dramatic apology, knowing how this would play out. To his surprise, the girl blinked, stunned by his quick surrender. Her fire fizzled out, but she said an apology wasn't enough. Then she noticed Blair had vanished. Meanwhile, Blair dashed toward the school, overwhelmed by this strange world where science and magic mixed. Suddenly, a sharp pain hit his head, and everything went black. Memories flooded in, memories not his own. A young Blair cried for his father as soldiers announced the general's death. His mother received a condolence box, and they had to move. Women whispered about their fall from nobility. Later, an older Blair proudly told his mother he got into Dona's Magic Academy. She smiled sadly but proudly, urging him to study hard. Blair remembered working in the academy library, scolded by an old man to hurry or lose his bed. No matter how hard he tried, classmates mocked his failed fire magic and poor math, calling him an illegitimate brat writing on his late father's name. In the present, a voice pulled him back. It was Jasmine. She offered her hand and asked if he was okay. Surprised by her kindness, Blair quietly thanked her, feeling warmth he hadn't known in years. Walking back, Blair decided that no matter his past, this life was his now. Later, in class, the professor lectured on the 4 core elements: earth, fire, wind, and water, and how talent made a magician. Blair, lost in thought, realized the world valued both math and magic. He had the brains, but lacked the magic. After class, a student complained about the boring lecture. Blair asked the professor if someone with no talent could use magic. The professor sighed and said no one without talent could even sense magic. Nearby students laughed and mocked Blair, but Toby, a fatso, joked that Blair's dad could still get him a job on their estate. Toby was the only friend Blair had, sharing even his meals. As Toby left, Blair saw Jasmine still nearby. He asked if she wanted to say something, but she shook her head and said Miss Brittany wanted to see him after class. Blair agreed. Alone, he sat thinking. Jasmine seemed strange, like she wanted to say more but held back. Blair stared at his hands, knowing his math skills meant nothing without magic. Still, he tried a spell with awkward gestures. Nothing appeared, just a wisp of smoke. He smirked, not expecting much, and rested his hand on the desk. Suddenly, his fist glowed, and a fireball formed, flames swirling around him. Shocked, Blair realized it was real. Blair stood in shock, staring at the flickering fireball in front of him. It was impossible. He had always believed he had no magical talent. Yet here it was, small, unstable, but real. He exhaled slowly, excitement welling up in his chest. He had done it. Though it looked like a scrappy little fireball, he couldn't help but wonder if, as a mere traveler, He had just experienced some kind of enlightenment. But then it hit him, he had completely forgotten his appointment with Miss Brittany. Moments later, he was standing outside her office, knocking hurriedly and apologizing for being late. She allowed him to enter, and the moment he stepped in, Miss Brittany's figure was unintentionally on full display, like the universe had decided to jump scare him with fanservice. She turned around, smiling upon seeing him, her rice cakes still defying gravity in the background like they had a personality of their own. She walked over and sat down, casually brushing off the scene, explaining she had the habit of standing while calculating. Blair, still a little confused, wondered why she had called him in the first place. She gestured for him to sit, handing him a pen and a sheet of paper covered in numbers. She told him not to rush, that she was stepping out for a moment, and he could take his time solving the problem. As she turned to leave, Blair casually spoke the correct answer aloud. Miss Brittany stopped mid-step, surprised. Turning back, she asked him to repeat it. He did, calmly seated, pen in hand. She rushed over, grabbed him by the collar, and stared at him in disbelief. How was that possible, even for her? Solving that would take considerable time. She demanded to know if he had seen this question before. Blair shook his head, denying it was randomly chosen by her. Miss Brittany, now flustered, asked if he'd be willing to tell her how he solved it so quickly. Embarrassed, scratching his head, Blair looked at her enthusiasm and couldn't help but wonder if his teacher might be a natural idiot. He scattered the papers across the table and explained what he saw. Her method was sequential addition, time-consuming and error-prone. He then added that she was still doing a good job and praised her for being powerful. Brittany nodded, saying this method was also what she taught in the previous class. But the way he solved it, as she wondered if there was truly another method. Blair smiled and told her she was wrong to think it was the only way. Taking the pen, he showed her, by pairing the first and last number, the second and the penultimate, and so on, they all added up to 80. He then asked her how many such pairs there were. Caught up in the moment, she raised her hand like a student and answered, 39 pairs. He praised her like a teacher, then chuckled and apologized, saying it was a habit. Brittany was amazed. Blair explained further that this changed the problem from a tedious addition task to a simple multiplication one, and reminded her not to forget the number 40 in the middle. With this method, she could now solve the problem in no time. Brittany was stunned that such a clever solution could exist. Inspired, she began scribbling another idea. If a set of numbers started from the second term, with a constant difference between each, then their sum could also be calculated using a simple formula. She got lost in thought. Blair waved his hand in front of her face. He muttered, half joking, wondering if their beginner-level math could shock the scholars of this world. Miss Brittany asked if it was his original solution. Blair gave a shy smile and admitted it was just an easier way to do it. He thought to himself that even if he mentioned it came from Gauss, she wouldn't know who that was. She praised him, calling him a genius, holding his hand, and saying that as long as he kept studying, his future would be limitless. But then she got too close. Blair yelped as her massive plots pressed against his head. Startled, she pulled away, embarrassed, apologizing, and saying she just got too excited. After a moment of silence, she asked him if he wanted to become a great mathematician. Blair replied excitedly that he wanted to become a great magician. Brittany tilted her head, confused. She leaned closer again, telling Blair he was incredibly talented in mathematics. It was a gift from the goddess of wisdom. He shouldn't waste it. She said he had no talent for magic. Holding his hand again, she added that even mathematicians had high status and treatment in society. Magic wasn't the only path. But Blair pulled his hand away and turned from her. He apologized, but said firmly he wanted to be a magician. In his thoughts, he figured that with the mathematical knowledge from his previous world, he could easily become a legendary mathematician here. But magic that was far more fascinating than clout or fame, he was determined. Miss Brittany then asked if he would dare to make a bet with her. Blair raised a brow. She explained that his class's magic test was coming up. This test would determine whether he could stay in the academy. Blair nodded. He knew that failing meant dismissal. She then made a proposal that if he passed the test, she would stop advising him to pursue mathematics. But if he failed, she would help him apply for a teaching assistantship so he could stay at the academy under one condition. he would give up magic and study math with her. She turned to him and asked what he thought. Inside, she felt a little sorry for him. To her, it was a bet he was sure to lose after all. He had no magic talent. But Blair looked her in the eyes and said, "It's a deal." As Blair left Miss Brittany's office, he couldn't help but think that this teacher was way too persistent. Clinging to the doorframe, she reminded him once again not to forget about their bet. He sighed, regretting his decision, muttering that he really should head back and study magic instead. Just as he was about to walk away, a girl suddenly appeared out of nowhere and crashed into him, sending him tumbling to the floor. The familiar softness pressed against him made his expression shift to horror. It was her again. The same girl he ran into before. Her eyes lit up with fury as she grabbed him by the collar, yelling that he was shameless. Before he could explain, she already had a fireball swirling in her palm like a Pokemon attack. In the very next second, Blair had vanished. The girl stood there stunned, now even angrier. She looked around frantically, wondering where that shameless brat had disappeared so fast. Meanwhile, Blair was sticking flat against a nearby corridor wall, drenched in sweat and whispering to himself that if he hadn't run like his life depended on it, he'd be a pile of burnt ashes by now. Later that day, back in Miss Brittany's office, the same fiery girl sat across the desk. Miss Brittany addressed her calmly, calling her by name, Isabella, and asked why she looked so grumpy. Isabella huffed and said she'd run into a simp. Twice. In one day. As she said, the next time she meets him will definitely blast him with a fireball. Miss Brittany listened carefully, barely able to hold back her laughter. Then Isabella pulled out a stack of papers and proudly announced she had solved the math problem Brittany had given her. Took her just half an afternoon. She smugly claimed her speed was almost as good as Brittany's now. Brittany took the papers, nodding approvingly. Then she casually added, almost like a jab, that Blair had solved the same problem in less than a minute. Isabella's eyes shot open, stunned. She'd never even heard of this Blair, wondering who this guy was. Brittany smiled and said Blair had used a method Isabella hadn't seen before. She even demonstrated it to her on the spot. As Isabella watched, her jaw dropped. That trick was real. She was shocked that some random guy could come up with something like that. She leaned forward, eyes sparkling, now genuinely excited. She told Brittany she wanted to meet him right away. Moments later, she was tearing down the hall like a bolt of lightning and burst into Blair's classroom. Everyone froze as she stomped in and announced loudly, asking if Blair was there like she was auditioning for a crime drama. Toby, the fatty boy sitting in front, instantly broke into a nervous sweat. Underneath the bench, Blair was pulling on Toby's pants, silently begging him to shut his mouth. Jasmine sat stiffly beside him, not daring to speak either. Isabella scanned the classroom. Blair wasn't in sight. She huffed and turned to Toby, saying that when Blair returned, they should tell him she needed to speak with him. Toby, trying not to shake, nodded and forced a smile, promising he would. The moment Isabella was gone, Blair crawled out from beneath the bench and exhaled deeply in relief. But the entire class was now staring at him. He looked around, confused, and asked what they were looking at. Toby leaned in, gripping Blair's shoulders. He demanded the truth. What exactly happened between him and Isabella? Blair blinked, a sly smile curling on his face. So her name is Isabella. Toby gaped at him, whispering that Blair seriously had no idea what kind of girl she was. Blair raised an eyebrow in disgust, asking bluntly who she even was. As Toby reminded Blair if he even knew how many pursuers Isabella had in the academy, he added that if they found out Blair had offended their goddess, they wouldn't let him off so easily. Blair replied that this was Donna's academy, not some street gang. They couldn't just do whatever they wanted. Toby sighed and said, sure, he knew they were at Donna's academy, but then asked Blair if he even knew where this academy was. Blair casually responded, Baker Street. Toby added, in the city of Apollo. Toby exhaled and muttered that he thought Blair was only playing dumb, but now it seemed the guy was genuinely stupid. Then Toby dropped the bomb. Isabella's father was the lord of the city of Apollo. Blair froze, completely stunned. He was just reeling from a failed crush, and now this. Nervously, he asked Toby if maybe he apologized, would she forgive him? That's when a voice came from behind. If he dared to touch her, there'd be no place left for him in the academy. They turned around to find a guy glaring at Blair, cracking his knuckles. A couple more students stood with him, agreeing ominously that Blair's days at Donas were numbered. Blair recognized him. Bud, an old bully who used to pick on him. From behind, Toby stepped forward and shouted at Bud, asking if he was looking for a fight. Meanwhile, Blair was quietly thinking he was right about one thing. At Dona's Academy, aside from magic, they also taught math, history, philosophy, and other noble disciplines. Even if one failed to become a magician, becoming a scholar could still earn respect in the kingdom. But Dona's Academy was still a top-tier institution. Anyone who failed to pass the magic test in their second year would be expelled, no exceptions. And unfortunately, Blair was a rare case. A complete waste in terms of magical talent. The upcoming test wasn't just a hurdle, it was a death sentence for his academic future. And he knew Miss Brittany had deliberately chosen this as their bet. Back to the situation at hand, Bud came close and slammed his fist on the desk in front of Blair and Toby, yelling that Blair hadn't heard what he said. He grabbed Blair by the collar and called him an orphan brat. Toby stepped in, scared but trying to defend, asking Bud if he really wanted to fight here. Bud coldly told him to stay out of it. But Toby suddenly shouted that Blair was his friend, so it was his business. If Bud wanted to fight, he should come at him. Blair looked at Toby in surprise. This fatty dude had real ride-or-die energy. Bud grunted like a budget villain, backed off, saying he'd remember this and would settle it another day. Then he stormed off with his lackeys. As they left, Blair looked at Toby and smiled, touched by his loyalty. He put an arm around him and asked if Isabella came to trouble him again, would he still be on his side? Toby laughed and said, sure, he would. He'd just try to beat Blair as lightly as possible. Blair immediately felt nervous again. A few days later, students gathered on the academy's school grounds. The teachers stood before them and explained the rules. The content of this magic test was simple: the mastery of Fireball. Those who couldn't pass would lose their eligibility to remain at the academy. But Fireball was the most basic magic spell. Mr. Anthony believed every student should be able to pass with ease. He ordered them to stand in line and cast the fireball at a designated target. First up was Bud. He confidently stepped forward, chanted the incantation, and summoned a large fireball. With practiced aim, he blasted the target. The teacher noted he passed with an 8. One by one, students came and passed the test. Blair stood beside Toby, both watching nervously. Bud passed by them with a smirk, mocking, saying they should enjoy their last day at the academy. Toby clenched his fists and told him to shut up. Then it was Toby's turn. He stepped forward nervously, summoned a tiny fireball, and barely hit the target. Mr. Anthony paused, then nodded. It counted. Toby had passed. Toby turned around, grinning in victory. Then Mr. Anthony glanced at the final student left, Blair. He looked at the report in his hand and sighed. Blair had no magical talent. He couldn't even summon a fireball. Mr. Anthony thought it was best to spare the poor kid the humiliation. He announced the test was over. But Bud suddenly stepped forward and shouted for him to wait. Pointing directly at Blair, Bud said loudly, "He hasn't tested yet." Blair stood unfazed, his eyes calm as Mr. Anthony asked him directly if he planned to take the test. Meanwhile, Bud and his gang were already cracking jokes, mocking him loudly. They laughed that even though Blair was technically a student of a magic academy, he couldn't cast a single spell. According to them, it was only a matter of time before he got kicked out. A group of nosy girls rushed over too, giggling and gossiping that the academy's magic idiot was about to lose face. Miss Brittany, standing nearby, overheard their remarks and turned to watch. Toby placed a comforting hand on Blair's shoulder, muttering that it was obvious they were trying to humiliate him. But Blair only sighed, rolled up his sleeves, and walked forward. He wasn't going to just stand there. Bud and his gang were stunned at first, then burst into laughter, thinking Blair was dreaming of miracles. The rest of the students started gathering like it was a festival, all eager to watch the so-called loser fail in real time. Miss Brittany stayed silent, watching intently. Mr. Anthony raised his voice to calm the crowd, then turned to Blair, asking him one last time if he really wanted to proceed. Blair nodded firmly. He wanted to try. Mr. Anthony glanced at his report with a sympathetic expression, then gave him permission to begin, saying that whatever the result, Blair had already done well to get this far. Standing before the target board, Blair took a deep breath. Sure, he could cast without chants or gestures, but he decided to play the part. He stretched out his hand, recited the chant, and summoned his will. A gust of air pushed the students behind him as they shielded their faces, still no fireball in sight. Bud and his crew burst out laughing, calling the moment dramatic for nothing. But they spoke too soon. As Blair finished his spell, a fireball suddenly formed, brilliant, searing, and furious, and launched straight at the target. The impact was explosive. The board shattered with a thunderous blast. Gasps rippled through the students. Even the teachers froze in place. Mr. Anthony stepped forward, stunned, and declared Blair had passed. Bud was speechless. His jaw was practically on the ground as he muttered that it couldn't be real. Toby ran up and grabbed Blair, grinning like a kid. He teased that Blair had been hiding this all along. Mr. Anthony, still in awe, told Blair to follow him. As they walked away, Miss Brittany silently watched them leave, her expression unreadable. In the office, Mr. Anthony asked if Blair had been secretly practicing every day according to the textbook. Blair just nodded and played along. The teacher then explained with a thoughtful tone that magic was a gift from the gods. Spells and gestures were the way humans learned to communicate with the elements. Those without talent were considered abandoned by the gods. There weren't many of them, but Blair was supposedly one. Now, not only had he shown talent, but the fireball he cast was exceptional in both speed and power. Mr. Anthony smiled proudly, placing a hand on Blair's shoulder and telling him he had the potential to become an excellent magician. Blair, meanwhile, thought back to the last time a teacher praised him, probably trying to lure him into studying math. But this time, it felt real. He thanked Mr. Anthony, adding that when he first arrived in this world, he had been really interested in magic. But now, more than anything, he just wanted to return to his original world. That made Mr. Anthony pause, eyebrows furrowing. He asked what Blair meant by original world. Realizing his mistake, Blair quickly covered up, saying he'd just been reading too many fantasy comics lately and was talking nonsense. Mr. Anthony nodded slowly, noting Blair had clearly been working hard. Then he mentioned that the other world Blair referred to reminded him of the legend of the Holy Mage, those rare beings said to have mastered space magic and could tear open the fabric of the world to travel to another. Of course, he added, that was just a myth. After all, everyone knew the gods only made one world. But Blair's eyes widened as he learned that the Holy Mage could travel between worlds. Without hesitation, he grabbed both of Mr. Anthony's shoulders with blazing determination in his eyes and declared he had to become a Holy Mage. Later, Blair was in the Academy library, surrounded by piles of magic books scattered across the table. After the magic test, the Academy granted a rare few days off, and Blair used this time to dive deep into every magic-related book the library had to offer. As he studied, he discovered that the magician levels in this world were divided into 7 stages: beginner, intermediate, advanced, great magician, mage, great mage, and finally, holy mage, the pinnacle of all magicians. Their powerful abilities were only recorded in ancient magical texts. No one had seen one in real life. Blair came across multiple mentions of holy mages being capable of using space magic to tear through dimensions and enter other worlds. Though many now believed space magic to be a myth and other worlds to be nonsense, Blair thought otherwise. Judging from his own experience, space magic had to be real, and it might be his only hope of returning home. He sighed, feeling low. It was unfortunate Mr. Anthony didn't believe in space magic. That meant Blair couldn't expect much help or information from him. Just as he was lost in thought, someone tapped the table. Blair looked up. It was the librarian, giving him a stern look and telling him that if he wasn't going to work, the library couldn't support idlers. Blair smiled awkwardly, apologized, and quickly packed up his things. Walking out, he thought about how he had stayed up arranging and reading all night. He hadn't expected library life to be this exhausting. His body trembled and his eyes drooped with fatigue. As he entered the classroom like an overworked anime protagonist, he overheard students gossiping about his fireball during the test, saying it was even bigger than Mr. Anthony's. Some wondered if he had been hiding his strength all along. Girls whispered that Blair looked handsome if one looked closely. Then, someone mentioned that Isabella wanted to meet him. Blair's eyes widened as he turned and saw her standing right there. Shocked, he instinctively tried to hide his face, with the desperation of someone hiding from both the police and his ex. From behind, she spoke so unexpectedly. This was the Blair Miss Brittany had mentioned. Blair panicked, waving his hands as he tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding. But Isabella yelled, calling him a simp. She immediately conjured a fireball, and the classroom instantly turned into a budget fire show. Blair shielded his face, closing his eyes, bracing for impact. But at that moment, Miss Brittany appeared, snatched Isabella's wrist mid-cast, and scolded her. Concerned, she asked how Isabella could use magic inside the classroom. Isabella tried to argue, but Miss Brittany shut her down. Then, she turned to Bly, who was still processing his near-death experience, saying she had been looking for him. She told both of them to follow her to the office. Blair had no choice but to go. The class was left in stunned silence. Even Bud stood there, dumbfounded, still trying to process what had happened. Inside the office, Blair sincerely apologized to Isabella, admitting it was his fault for bumping into her. Miss Brittany then said everything was clear, and that she trusted Blair's character. He had probably just been careless. She told Isabella not to bother with it anymore. Though still annoyed, Isabella said that since Miss Brittany vouched for him, she could only forgive him. Miss Brittany then turned to Blair, saying she had watched his performance during the magic test and admitted it was beyond her expectations. He had won the bet, and as agreed, she wouldn't try to persuade him again. But leaning closer, she asked if he could tell her how he did it. It was the first time she'd ever seen someone without magical talent regain magical abilities. Blair shyly said it was just a coincidence, then added he had a question for her. Miss Brittany assured him that if he didn't want to reveal anything, she wouldn't push him, and he could ask whatever he wanted. She'd answer if she could. Blair stood and walked toward her, asking if it was necessary to use spells and magical gestures to communicate with magic elements. Before she could reply, Isabella scoffed, saying it was a dumb question. Even children knew magic could only be used with spells and gestures. Blair continued, wondering if every magician truly had to follow that rule, with no exceptions at all. Miss Brittany explained that no matter how powerful a magician was, they still needed spells and gestures to communicate with magic. Skilled magicians might do it faster, but the method was the same. Magic was a gift from the gods, passed down through generations via spells and gestures. Only the gods themselves might be capable of casting magic without them. Isabella smirked, telling Miss Brittany not to take such a stupid question seriously. Blair looked at his hand, a thought creeping in. Since he wasn't from this world, maybe the god of this world had no control over him. While Blair is being told by the teacher that what he asked is basic magic common sense, she reminds him that if he wants to become a magician, he'd better start memorizing all the theories in the magic book. However, this time she called him here for something more important. Holding a folded piece of paper, she gestures to Blair. As he asks about it, Isabella chimes in, saying it's a journal, one that publishes the most important academic papers in the kingdom. Blair stares at the paper curiously, and Isabella suddenly notices the names listed. Her eyes widen in shock. Blair and the teacher's names are on it. The teacher then smiles, explaining that she derived the summation formula Blair mentioned last time and used it to write this paper. Since the idea was originally inspired by him, his name was added as a co-author. As Blair listened, he felt weirdly detached, thinking deep down that the signature felt as useless to him. What he really needed was cold, hard cash. Working at the library every day earned him just enough to buy food. Just then, the teacher adds that she nearly forgot something. She pulls out a small pouch and says it's the manuscript bonus, 50 silver coins. She kept rambling about how prestige was more important, but Blair had already mentally converted the coins into meals. Blair is stunned and overjoyed. He's been earning 2 silver coins a month at the library, and now it wasn't exactly dragon treasure, but Blair stared at it like it was a gift from the gods. Eyes sparkling like he just won the lottery, Blair grinned and held out his pocket like a human piggy bank, saying for her to drop the coins in. In a moment of pure dumb excitement, he blurts out that half the credit should go to Miss Brittany. Hearing this, the greedy teacher smoothly took half the pouch, and handed him the remaining 25 silver coins like it was the most natural thing in the world. Blair freezes, the smile slowly draining from his face. Outside, he nodded politely, but his soul was busy throwing itself off a cliff. Trying to recover, a sly idea pops into his head. He asks Miss Brittany if every paper published in that journal comes with a 50-coin bonus. She replies that she hasn't paid much attention to it, but since it's the kingdom's academic journal, that amount sounds standard. Encouraged, Blair shares that he's been thinking of another mathematical concept, a sequence where each term has a constant ratio with the previous one, starting from the second term. He wonders if there's a unified formula to represent the sum. Miss Brittany's eyes gleam with excitement. She exclaims he must be talking about the mystery of Rouse. Blair looks confused, prompting her to explain. As Miss Brittany explained, the mystery of Rouse is a famous math problem posed by the mathematician Rouse, who had 7 wives, each with 7 pockets, each pocket holding 7 cats, and each cat having 7 kittens. Blair nods, saying that in this case, the number of items is small enough to add manually, but with more terms, a formula would help. Brittany's excitement skyrockets as she grabs his hand, urging him to deduce the formula right away. Time passes quickly. The room clock ticks on as the two bury themselves in calculations. Nearby, Isabella has fallen asleep in a chair. When she wakes up and sees them still at it, Miss Brittany is overjoyed, announcing that the mystery of Rouse can indeed be solved with a formula. She praises Blair's mathematical brilliance, asking if he still doesn't want to study math under her. Isabella, now awake and impressed, pats Blair on the shoulder, admitting she had no idea he had a talent for mathematics. Curious, she asks if all of these ideas really came from him. Blair responds that he simply spent time thinking about math while others were sleeping, nothing more. Isabella is stunned by the simplicity of his answer. The next day, Isabella walks through the corridor, replaying Blair's words in her mind. Strangely, they make sense, but something about the way he spoke still feels too casual, as if he were brushing things off. As she rounds the corner, she's shocked to see Blair in front of her. Instinctively, she hides behind the wall, puzzled about why a second-grade student would be in the third-grade building. Suspicious that the simp might be up to something again, she decides to tail him and see for herself. But in the blink of an eye, Blair vanishes. Meanwhile, Blair stands outside in front of a tall wall. The third-grade teaching building runs all the way to the back, ending at this low stone wall. Blair remembers everything Toby told him, every detail, and especially how he warned him not to say it was Toby's idea if something bad happened. This situation matches Toby's words exactly. Blair climbs the wall and jumps over to the other side. Looking ahead, he's greeted with a striking view of the bustling city. Blair recalls what Mr. Anthony once said, that if he wanted to learn more advanced magic, he should head to the Law Society in Yapo City. There, he could hire a higher-level magician as a mentor. Now, standing before the site of Yapo, Blair can only hope that Mr. Anthony was right. Life here was in full swing, bustling with noise and energy. Sellers were selling goods as Blair walked through the street. Before him stood the towering building of the Magical Association, and he couldn't help but think how prosperous it looked. He pulled out a mask from his pocket and put it on, deciding it was safer to keep his identity hidden for now. Stepping inside, he approached the reception counter where a smiling girl greeted him, asking if he wanted to hire a magic consultant. Blair nodded, but his heart skipped a beat upon recognizing her. It was Jasmine, the same girl from his class. She was probably working part-time here. She explained that the monthly commission for senior magicians was 10 gold coins, 5 for intermediates, and just 2 for juniors. Blair nearly choked. This was pure suffering. His entire savings amounted to just 30 silver coins, and with 1 gold coin worth 100 silvers, he could barely afford a fraction of a consultant. He turned to leave, apologizing for the trouble. Jasmine called after him and asked if he was facing money problems, then offered a library card for the library. That caught his attention, and he turned back. Library. She explained the association's library housed thousands of magical books, containing most of the kingdom's magical knowledge. It might not compare to personal instruction, but it was entirely free. Blair's eyes lit up. He asked for the card, but Jasmine requested his magic credential. Another punch to the gut. He didn't have any. She looked surprised and said she had assumed he was already certified since he was trying to hire a consultant. To borrow a card, he needed at least an apprentice-level magic certificate. She explained that certification was simple. For instance, to certify as a fire magic apprentice, all he had to do was cast a fireball in front of the examiner. Blair asked if the test could be done here. Jasmine nodded but advised against it. The examiner on duty today was notoriously strict, with a pass rate of less than 10%. Over 300 had already failed under him. Blair, however, was unfazed. He told her he'd take the test today. Jasmine led him to two men sipping tea. She informed them that Blair was here for certification. One of the men wore a fire-red magic robe with 2 silver threads, an intermediate fire magician. The bald man looked at Blair and asked for his name and why he wore a mask. Blair introduced himself as Chen Luo and claimed his face had been burned while practicing fireball magic. The older man with thick hair chuckled, saying that if he burned his face, the fireball must be something. The bald man, however, scoffed at his name and age, remarking that at best Blair would remain a junior magician all his life. Jasmine politely tried to lead them to the testing hall, but the bald man waved her off, saying they could do it right there. He told Blair to use his face-burning fireball and attack him. Blair confirmed that the test would happen here and commented that it seemed a bit too simple. The older man sat lazily on the sofa and told him to go ahead. If he was told to attack, then don't waste time. Blair took a deep breath and began casting. The bald man, Andre, scoffed from the sidelines, muttering how none of these newbies could even light a candle without crying. But as Blair chanted, heat filled the room. A massive fireball formed between his hands, roaring with energy. Everyone stared in shock. Andre, the bald man, shouted for him to stop, but it was too late. The fireball launched like a magical slap from the gods and blasted Andre straight into the back wall, smoke filling the room as the fireball exploded, causing everyone to cough. The old man quickly reacted, throwing up ice spells to contain the mess. Andre lay on the ground, twitching, looking like he'd just seen the afterlife. Jasmine stood frozen in disbelief. Blair scratched his head awkwardly, saying he thought they were ready, so he might have used a little too much force. Later, Blair received his certification along with the library card from Jasmine. Just as he was about to leave, Jasmine smiled and praised him. She said his fireball technique today was incredible. She had never seen anyone produce such power with that spell. She added that with time, he would surely become a great magician. Blair turned back, thanked her sincerely, and even called her by name. Jasmine blinked in surprise, wondering how he knew her name. At the library, Blair was left stunned by the sheer number of books. He hadn't expected so many people either. Pulling a few books from the shelves, he sat at a table and began reading. As he flipped through pages, he thought Jasmine was right. The magic books here were far more comprehensive than those in the academy. The content was deeper, especially the parts that discussed magical spiritual power. One passage explained that the level of a magician's spiritual power was the most important factor in measuring magical strength. The higher the spiritual power, the stronger the magician's connection with magic elements, and the more powerful their spells. High-level magicians could even suppress the control that lower-level ones had over the same elements. It was clear now why the level gap between magicians was nearly impossible to overcome in real combat. However, Blair couldn't help but frown at the section explaining the 4 magic elements. According to this world's magicians, the 4 basic elements weren't just the foundation of magic. They were the foundation of the entire world. Every other element was formed through a specific combination of the 4. Blair scoffed inwardly. From a modern scientific point of view, that theory was absolute nonsense. Everyone knew that matter consisted of many different basic elements, but the so-called 4 didn't even exist in the periodic table. Still, he hadn't found any solid scientific explanation for the magical elements in this world either. Then a thought struck him. If magic elements could be communicated with, maybe he could interact with them directly. His eyes lit up. He stood abruptly, the sudden screech of his chair drawing unwanted attention. He didn't care. If this worked, he might be able to create brand new magic. He grabbed his library card and ran for the exit, eager to try it out. Meanwhile, in the resting room, Jasmine was serving tea to Andre and the old man. The bald man noted that Chen Luo's mental strength was clearly low. Yet the fireball spell he cast was outrageous. The older man silently agreed, observing that what was even stranger was Chen Luo's lack of control over the fire element he had summoned. There was something odd about the boy, something they couldn't quite understand. Back at the academy, Blair hopped over the outer wall and landed on the training ground like a sneaky ninja. As he noticed no one was around, it was the perfect time. He closed his eyes and started casting. A few seconds in, something shifted. He felt it. The magic was real. It was flowing, and this time he could actually control it. Focusing hard, he aimed for the second most abundant element in the atmosphere. He raised his hand, and a glowing orb formed on his palm. Blair blinked, wondering if this was pure oxygen. He couldn't really tell just by looking at it, but something about the glow told him it was. Curious, he decided to push it further. At first, nothing much, just some tiny white smoke. Kinda disappointing, and then flash. Sparks burst out of nowhere, followed by a massive surge of energy. Windows in the distance started shaking, and the ground literally rumbled like an earthquake had just hit. Inside the building, Miss Brittany stopped writing and glanced out the window, like, what the heck was that? Meanwhile, the training ground was now a smoke zone. Blair staggered, coughing like crazy. Good thing he pulled back in time. He wiped sweat off his face, heart pounding. That was way more intense than he expected. Full combustion, he just caused a full-blown chemical reaction. Fuel plus oxygen equals heat, gas, smoke, and boom. Realizing, which meant the oxygen he summoned was stupidly pure. Then someone was running over, yelling what happened. Blair panicked. He didn't plan to blow up half the field. He took off running, mind racing. Sure, it was reckless, but also, he might have just made a huge discovery. Blair was passed out in class again, trying to catch up on the sleep he absolutely should not have missed. Around him, students were chatting. He kept one ear open, telling himself never to stay up late again. Then Toby slid up to him with full energy, clearly dying to gossip, asking if he had heard what happened at the academy last night. Blair said he had just slept pretty hard that night and asked him what happened. Toby delivered the hot news like it was breaking on national TV. A huge explosion erupted right next to the third-grade teaching building, shattering every window with a deafening blast. Blair blinked slowly, that sounded suspiciously familiar. Toby went on, saying the whole academy was now under investigation. They suspected that some high-level magician was casting spells on campus. Disappointed, Toby said he wished Blair had seen it. Whoever did it had to be at least a high magician. Blair tried to play innocent, saying he's never even seen a high-level magician. Toby gave him the most dramatic look ever, saying Miss Brittany is a high-level magician. Blair's jaw almost hit the floor. Later, Blair went to see Miss Brittany. The moment he stepped in, she smiled and said she was just about to call for him. She handed him an academic journal and said the Mathematical Society had published a paper on Rouse's problem. And guess what? She put Blair's name as the first author. She congratulated him on solving one of the biggest mysteries in math. Blair then, gathering all the courage in the universe, spoke up, saying he came to ask something more important. Without thinking, Blair blurted it out. He wanted to study math with her. That caught her completely off guard. She blinked in confusion, trying to process it. She wondered why he hadn't said he wanted to be a magician. Blair admitted that he also loved math. He didn't want to have regrets. Said he even felt like he might have been a noble math teacher in his past life, maybe just like her. Miss Brittany's heart practically exploded. She grabbed Blair's hands and, all flustered, told him she was really happy to hear that. She offered to tutor him every night after school. Then, out of nowhere, she hugged him tightly against her very generous plots. Blair turned tomato red. His soul nearly left his body. He quickly pulled away, stuttering about how he also had magic questions to ask. She giggled and reminded him to come again tomorrow night. Blair bolted for the door, saying goodbye, but just as he stepped out, she called him back. He turned slowly. Miss Brittany looked curiously at him, asking if he hadn't just said he wanted to study math as an excuse to sneak in magic questions. Blair started sweating bullets. He was about to get exposed. Thinking on his feet, he claimed he just wanted to spend more time with her, for academic reasons. If they were already studying together, slipping in a few magic questions would be way easier. Brittany lit up like a light bulb. She walked over with a big grin, clearly buying the whole act. With a teasing smile, she asked if Blair was the type to use math as a tool. Blair forced the shyest, most innocent expression he could manage and nodded like a guilty puppy. Satisfied, she waved him off, reminding him to get some rest and not to forget about tomorrow night. As he finally stepped out, he sighed in relief, wondering if this teacher was a genius or just really, really stupid. The next evening, Blair walked into Miss Brittany's office. He froze immediately. Isabella was already there. She turned and looked, just as stunned to see him, asking what he was doing here. Before Blair could speak, Miss Brittany spoke up with her usual cheerfulness. She casually mentioned that starting today, Blair would also be joining their math study sessions. Isabella's expression dropped, her sulky mode activated. Miss Brittany smiled, saying that since Isabella was the senior, it would be nice if she looked after Blair. Isabella turned her back dramatically, arms crossed like a grumpy cat. Unbothered, Miss Brittany told Blair to sit next to Isabella. She already had a question prepared for him. A stone was thrown into a deep well. Sometime later, another stone, twice as heavy, was thrown in. The task was to figure out when the second would catch up with the first. Blair blinked slowly, so now this was a physics problem. Isabella leaned back with a confident smirk. She explained it was a basic catch-up scenario and that only the time difference mattered. But Blair calmly stated that the second stone would never catch up. Without air resistance, heavier objects didn't fall faster. The mass wouldn't make a difference. Isabella's smug look evaporated, and she scoffed at Blair's response, muttering something about how he lacked even the most basic knowledge. Miss Brittany looked a little lost. She admitted she didn't understand what Blair meant by air resistance. All she knew was that the sages had clearly said heavier objects fall faster. Isabella jumped on the support, proudly repeating that the greater the mass, the faster the fall. That was the truth taught by the sages, and something even a child should know. Blair stared at her with the expression of someone watching someone else proudly explain how 2 + 2 = 5. He asked if she just believed everything the sages said without ever testing it. Isabella's eye twitched. Her expressions tightened. She stood up and declared that he had no right to question the sages. Miss Brittany glanced back and forth between them like she was stuck in the middle of a magical Cold War. Blair remained calm. He said that science relied on testing and verification. If something couldn't be proven, then it wasn't the truth, it was a belief. That was when Isabella said if he wanted proof, then he would get it. She proposed a bet. Blair immediately tried to dodge the idea, saying that gambling was definitely not what a student should be doing. But Isabella wasn't listening. 10 gold coin, she said, a proper wager. Miss Brittany tried to intervene, but it was already too late. Blair and Isabella were locked in a death stare, as if the fate of physics itself rested on their shoulders. Miss Brittany scratched her head, wondering how this peaceful study session had turned into a science-based duel. On the school grounds, Miss Brittany stood holding 2 stones in her hands, casually explaining that one was about twice as heavy as the other. She glanced at Blair and told him to think carefully. 10 gold coins weren't exactly pocket change. Blair, calm as ever, said he had already thought it through. Isabella, standing nearby, scoffed with her usual smirk. He thought he could win this. Miss Brittany gave him a small smile, saying confidence was fine and all, but reminded him not to get too full of himself. And just like that, she floated into the air, slowly rising upward like it was the most normal thing in the world. Blair stared with wide eyes, clearly not expecting that. Isabella, arms crossed, explained it was just wind magic, a wind control technique, nothing special. Hovering up on the rooftop now, Miss Brittany held the stones out. On Isabella's cue, she dropped both at the same time, one from each hand. All eyes followed them as they fell straight down. The stones hit the ground together. Blair's face lit up with confidence, while Isabella's jaw basically hit the floor. She stared at the stones like they had just betrayed her. Miss Brittany floated back down, landing gracefully. She looked at Blair with surprise in her eyes and asked how he knew the old law was wrong. Blair replied casually that he had read it in his textbook, tried it out himself with 2 stones, and noticed it didn't match what the book claimed. Miss Brittany stood there in quiet awe, thinking to herself, a truth passed down for thousands of years, shattered by 2 ordinary rocks. No one until now had thought to challenge it. And yet here was Blair. She turned to him and said he probably had no idea what this moment meant. Shortly, the textbooks would likely include the new law of falling objects, with Blair's name printed right beside it. Blair scratched his head, saying there was still plenty to improve about this new law. And besides, it wasn't just him, they were all involved. Though inside, he muttered that the name sounded lame again. Better to wrap it in something emotional so people like it more. Miss Brittany disagreed. She said it was all thanks to Blair. She just dropped the stones. Then, placing a hand on each of their shoulders, she smiled and suggested they work together. Maybe Blair and Isabella could team up to perfect the law. Blair looked a little shy, saying he needed Isabella's help, though he wasn't sure she'd be up for it. Isabella blinked, caught off guard. For a moment, she imagined the two of them working side by side, casually tossing around genius-level ideas, gaining recognition. Her daydream fast-forwarded. She agreed in a soft voice. If Blair said so, she didn't mind. Blair thanked her with a small nod. Meanwhile, Isabella had mentally wandered off again. The mental image of her name next to Blair's made her cheeks flush, like they were some magical power couple. Then suddenly she snapped out of it as Blair held his hand out to her. She stared, confused and blushing, her brain spinning all kinds of wild scenarios. As she asked what he wanted, Blair's face lit up with a grin. He wanted his 10 gold coins. His eyes were practically dancing with the shine of money. Isabella ran off, red-faced, cursing herself for what nonsense had just gone through her head. Later, she handed over the coins. Blair sat there counting them with pure joy written across his face. In his mind, he was already thinking this might be the secret to getting rich. Just make bets and win. 10 gold coins in one day, easy money. Isabella watched him with a look of disbelief. She told him he didn't seem to care much for fame or honor. All he cared about was money. But then she paused and added that it didn't feel like it was just about the money. Blair's expression flickered. Isabella asked what it was that he wanted. Blair opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but no words came out. His gaze turned distant as memories of his previous life flashed in his mind. Then, just as quickly, he snapped back to reality, brushing it off and asking what she was even talking about. Said he just wanted enough money to make life better. He turned to leave, waving as he said it was getting late. Miss Brittany and Isabella stood there, watching him walk away. The next day, Blair was slouched over his desk in the classroom, head down. In his mind, he was comparing the hard wooden desk to the tiny cubicle he had been living in. Honestly, this desk felt way more comfortable. Then it hit him, he had money now. Maybe it was time to upgrade where he slept. Before he could daydream too much, an annoying voice cut through the air. Bud appeared beside him, sneering as usual and calling him trash. Said Senior Phage was looking for him. Blair lifted his head slightly, confused, asking who this Phage even was. Without warning, Bud grabbed him by the collar and yanked him up. His face was twisted in anger as he told Blair not to get cocky, saying he thought he could pull off that fireball trick again, all because of one lucky fluke. Before Bud could go further, someone nearby told him to let Blair go. Bud turned, frowning, and then froze. Senior Phage had arrived, standing a few steps away with his crew behind him. Bud still had a tight grip on Blair's collar, but now there was hesitation in his posture. The presence of Phage changed the entire vibe. Blair glanced over, eyes narrowing. So that was Phage. Phage walked up, stopping right in front of Blair. His gaze locked onto him, eyes calm but sharp. He asked if his name was Blair. Blair stood still, collar still in Bud's hand, but attention fully on the guy now staring him down. Blair calmly told Bud to let go of his collar, brushing himself off as he turned to Phage. He said he's Blair and casually asked what the problem was while walking toward him. Phage didn't waste time. He told Blair straight up to stay away from Isabella from now on. Said someone like Blair had no business getting close to her like that. Without waiting for a reply, Phage turned around and walked off with his group. Bud, still hot with anger, muttered to Phage that he should have taught Blair a lesson, but Phage didn't even turn back. As they were leaving, Toby stood frozen in place, wide-eyed. Phage gave him a cold glance that made him step back in fear, and then they were gone from the classroom. Once things settled, Toby rushed over to Blair, clearly rattled, asking what the heck just happened. Blair, looking as chill as ever, told him it was nothing, just a guy named Phage saying a few words. Toby yelled at him, completely losing it. Said how the heck did Blair end up messing with Phage of all people? Blair raised an eyebrow, noticing how scared Toby looked just hearing that name. Toby went on, saying everyone in the academy feared Phage. Blair might be a weirdo who only cares about books, but this wasn't something to take lightly. Phage was from the Howard family and a poor, the youngest son of Viscount Howard. Not only that, he had a big pull in the numbers sec school, and even many of the academy teachers were part of that group. Offending Phage could make Blair's life at Donna's academy a nightmare. Toby patted Blair on the shoulder with a sigh. Said he understood Blair couldn't resist Isabella's beauty, but this wasn't worth it. He should take Phage's warning seriously. Blair, caught off guard, blushed and stammered a little, trying to deny he was into Isabella like that. The next day in Miss Brittany's office, Blair was sitting in the chair looking way too comfortable. His mind was drifting. He was thinking about how powerful that pure oxygen fireball was. But next time, he figured it'd be better to summon the fireball first, and then the oxygen. That way, the combo wouldn't go off instantly. Without needing magic spells or gestures, his ability to use instant magic was still his biggest advantage. His mind wandered again, wondering how in the world to summon different elements at once. Isabella's voice snapped him out of it. She reminded him to study the topic teacher Brittany had assigned, and said they'd be discussing it tomorrow. Blair yawned lazily and handed over his notes. Isabella stared at the paper, a bit shocked, as he had already written everything down, while she was only halfway done. Blair casually told her that not every topic could be solved with the same method, and she'd need to come up with smarter solutions. Isabella's eyes lit up, realizing that's how he solved it. Blair then suddenly asked how many fireballs she could summon at once now. She said 9. Blair froze like he had been struck by lightning. 9. The number hit him hard. He looked like someone had just snatched his soul. He asked how she managed that, and Isabella couldn't help but tease him. Said the genius junior, Blair could only summon fireballs one by one. Embarrassed, Blair admitted he'd read a ton of magic books, but none of them ever explained how to summon multiple magic elements at the same time. Isabella explained it all calmly and composed, like she was in a documentary about magical geniuses. She said it made total sense. Most magic books were just diet versions of real knowledge, packed with basic theory and zero spice. But her dad had gone all out and hired a high-level magician as her private tutor. Thanks to that, she'd learned how to summon multiple elements like it was no big deal. Then she smirked and tossed out the bait. If someone were willing to call her big sister, maybe she'd consider passing down her secret art. Blair, in less than a second, called her big sister with the confidence of a man who had no shame. Isabella exploded on the spot, yelling that he was way too thick-skinned to function. But after fuming for a few seconds, she muttered something about hopeless idiots and waved for him to follow her. She'd teach him anyway, reluctantly. Out in the school grounds, Blair followed Isabella as she stopped in the open field. With a flick of her wrist and a calm chant, she cast a spell. The next second, 9 blazing fireballs appeared in the air around her, glowing fiercely and floating with perfect control. Blair's jaw was almost touching the ground. Isabella turned to him, smug but patient, and began explaining the technique. She told him the secret behind Guan Kaien's multiple fireball technique was the dispersion of mental power. Most magicians assumed mental power could only be focused in one place, but in truth, with enough control, it could be split and manipulated across several points at once. Each scattered stream of mental power, she explained, could summon magical elements independently. That's how she was able to cast multiple fireballs at the same time. Blair, trying to digest all this, asked if it was possible for each divided mental thread to summon different types of magic elements too. Isabella looked at him, impressed. She said it was a sharp question, but also an insane challenge. She compared it to drawing a circle with one hand while drawing a square with the other. It was possible, sure, but extremely difficult. That level of control took serious talent and insane mental training. Meanwhile, behind a nearby wall, Bud was spying on them with narrowed eyes. His blood was boiling just watching Blair and Isabella so close together. He couldn't hear the lesson, but it looked way too friendly for his liking. He clenched his fists and ran off to report to Phage. When Phage heard the news, his expression darkened. His jaw tightened and his eyes burned with fury. Without hesitation, he swore he'd make that scumbag Blair pay for this. Blair stood confidently, ready to give it a try. He closed his eyes, focusing Isabella's explanation, dividing mental power into 9 parts and guiding each toward manifesting an individual fireball. Isabella watched him and calmly instructed him to do it gradually. But then, a fireball popped into existence. Isabella raised an eyebrow but shrugged. That was normal, nothing to brag about. She told him not to get discouraged, even though she had taken half a year to get it right. Just moments later, her eyes widened in disbelief. Floating around Blair, 9 fireballs hovered steadily in the air. Isabella was stunned, speechless for a second, and then blurted out, "How in the world did he pull that off so fast?" Blair innocently replied that he simply followed the method she taught. He divided his mental power and summoned the fireballs accordingly. But instead of praising him, Isabella clearly furious. Blair tilted his head, not understanding her anger. After all, she had said that anyone could do it once they understood the technique. But inside, Isabella was combusting with jealousy. This absolute simp wasn't just weirdly good at math. Now he was casually flexing high-level fire magic like it was a party trick. She stared at the 9 fireballs, then back at Blair. She thought he was supposed to be abandoned by the gods, yet here he was, mastering her technique in minutes, something that had taken her months. In a full-on childish meltdown, she screamed that she actually got it faster than him, technically. Then spun around with maximum sass and stormed off, shouting that she wasn't going to teach him anymore. If he ran into problems with magic, he better solve them himself. Blair stood there scratching his head. He thought women were more confusing than magical formulas. One moment smiling, next moment rage quitting the tutorial. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind. Without hesitation, he ran after her and grabbed her wrist. Isabella spun around, calling him a scumbag at full volume and demanding to know why he was suddenly going all handsy. Blair just held out a bracelet in his other hand and smiled like he just unlocked a secret achievement called emotional damage recovery. Blair gently said he only managed to learn it because of her careful teaching, and that this was just a tiny thank you gift. Isabella stared at the bracelet. She muttered something about him actually having a shred of conscience, but deep down her heart was doing backflips. She snatched the bracelet, cheeks glowing red, and turned to run off again like a tsundere in a drama. Over her shoulder, she yelled that the bracelet was ugly. Then, with a loud thud, her dramatic exit was cut short as she tripped over absolutely nothing and slammed face first into the ground. Blair, a little concerned, called out for her to slow down. She looked back at him while trying to get up, her glare sharper than a fireball. Blair stood there frozen, unsure if helping her up would earn him forgiveness or a direct punch to the soul. Like he was stuck in the classic case of, help the girl and die, or don't help the girl and still die. She scrambled back to her feet, yelled at him again, simp, and took off running. Blair lay back on the grass with a deep sigh, staring at the sky, thinking that if she didn't like the bracelet, she shouldn't have taken it. He had originally bought it for Miss Brittany as a thank you gift anyway, and it had cost him 50 silver coins. That was like 3 weeks of skipping snacks. Just as he was about to nap away the emotional damage, a shadow loomed over him. A group of guys stood around him, led by Bud. Bud stepped forward, and his face was the definition of high school villain energy. He said that he remembered how Phage warned Blair to stay away from Isabella. Blair blinked, then got up, instantly turned around and booked it like a chicken that just saw the frying pan, and ran. Behind him, the group exploded in curses and sprinted after him. Blair frowned as he sprinted away, muttering that this group was seriously annoying. Then Bud shouted from behind, asking if he was running just like his cowardly father, who fled from the battlefield and got killed. Blair stopped, and that struck a nerve. Before he could react, Bud caught up and slammed a punch into Blair's back. But in the next instant, smoke erupted. Bud screamed in pain, clutching his hand, which was scorched and trembling. His face was red and partially burned. The others backed off, stunned. Blair stood slowly, his voice cold and calm. He said that Bud was wrong. The guy, Blair's father, wasn't a coward. He was a soldier who died fighting for his country. He called him a great man, a great father. His eyes glowed with fury as 9 fireballs ignited in the air around him. The other students were terrified. One of them gasped, "How could he summon 9 fireballs?" They turned and fled in a panic, leaving Bud collapsed on the ground, screaming in fear. Blair approached slowly. Bud crawled backward, yelling for him to stay away, stammering that the academy strictly forbade students from fighting. Blair stopped, looking at the fireball calmly in his hand. He said, "So Bud knew about the rule after all." Bud trembled and pleaded with Blair not to be impulsive. But Blair, determined, said Bud should have thought of that earlier. The fireballs surged toward Bud. Just then, Blair noticed someone approaching from behind. Bud screamed for help and shut his eyes. When he opened them, Blair was lying unconscious at his feet. Bud was speechless. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew he had to get out now. Then a voice told him to stop. He turned to see Miss Brittany checking on Blair, suspecting Bud of causing this. Bud panicked, claiming Blair had fallen on his own. Blair, still on the ground, sneakily listened to all of it. Brittany hugged Blair, scolding Bud. She said she knew what Bud usually did to Blair. Bud stammered that things were different now, that it wasn't what she thought. Then a stern voice cut through the scene, and another man stepped in and told Bud to shut up. He was furious, saying they all saw Blair collapse at Bud's feet and weren't blind. Bud had humiliated the academy. He ordered Bud to wait in the office, saying he'd deal with him later. Bud, scared stiff, agreed and left. The man turned to Vice President Calvin and apologized for the academy's poor management. Calvin laughed lightly, brushing it off, saying such bullying among young students was common, but still needed to be handled seriously. Meanwhile, Brittany was still clutching Blair like he was a lost puppy she had just rescued from a thunderstorm. His eyes were closed, and the man looked like he'd seen heaven and gotten the VIP tour. Just as his soul was about to ascend, Brittany pulled back a little and asked if he was okay. Blair, barely functioning, muttered that he was, though it felt like he nearly died from lack of oxygen. She hugged him again, saying she was worried. Just then, the vice president cleared his throat and spoke to Blair. He said the academy would handle the situation properly, but they had more important matters to discuss. Brittany suddenly remembered to introduce the guests. She told Blair that this was Deputy Dean Archie, whom he might already know, and the other man was Vice President Calvin from the Mathematical Society. Blair respectfully bowed. Calvin commented that Blair assisting Brittany in solving the Rouse mystery made him a promising math talent. But Brittany interrupted, correcting him. Blair had solved the mystery all by himself. She only helped him write the paper. Calvin was impressed. He said solving the Rouse mystery gave Blair a real shot at winning the Edwin Prize this year, a great honor for the Apollo branch. He offered full support from the society to help Blair win it. Then, Calvin told Brittany she should reconsider. The Edwin Prize was the most prestigious math award. He and Archie both tried to convince her that this was a big deal for her and for the academy. Brittany was skeptical, saying it couldn't be Blair. Calvin reminded her that Blair was too young to be so skilled in mathematics. Nobody would believe her claim that he solved it on his own. Still, Brittany wasn't convinced. Then Blair stepped forward and gently held her hand. He had something to say. The two men nodded and told them to discuss it, and that they would respect Blair's decision, whatever it was. They turned and left. As Brittany and Blair walked back through the school corridor, she told him the solution to the Rouse problem might not be a breakthrough, but it held deep historical value. She said it belonged to Blair, and he shouldn't let anyone else take the honor. Blair stayed silent for a moment. Then he said the honor didn't belong to him, and added that she wasn't that old either. Brittany's eyes widened, and her cheeks went a full tomato red. Without a word, she quickly turned and ran off. Blair just stood there, a small smile creeping up, like probably because he said something wrong again. The students had gathered around the notice board, buzzing with excitement. Blair's published article had become the talk of the academy. Although the content was still shrouded in mystery, everyone was thoroughly impressed. Whispers floated through the crowd, suggesting that it was all thanks to Miss Brittany's influence. Blair overheard a few jealous students cursing him under their breath, mocking what sweet words or flattery he might have used to win Miss Brittany over. Hearing that, Blair quietly sighed. He hadn't expected Miss Brittany to still use the co-signature to publish the paper, but she did. Just then, a commotion reached his ears from the direction of the dean's office. Blair, curious, moved closer to eavesdrop. Inside, Bud's father was scolding him harshly for fighting at school, even going so far as to hit him in anger. Desperation filled the man's voice as he pleaded with the dean not to expel Bud. Dean Archie complained about Bud's repeated misconduct. Bud's father, overwhelmed with shame, knelt in apology, while Bud stood there, humiliated. Blair stepped in, drawing everyone's attention. The dean looked surprised to see him. Blair asked calmly what the matter was, and the dean explained that Bud had violated the rules and was facing expulsion. Upon hearing this, Bud's father immediately turned to Blair, pleading with him to forgive Bud, swearing he would discipline his son himself. He explained that if Bud got expelled, his future would be destroyed. Bud looked shaken by the sight of his father on his knees. Then, Blair turned to the dean and said that the conflict between him and Bud was nothing major. He hoped the academy wouldn't punish him so severely. A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Dean Archie sighed and announced that, based on Blair's request, they would withdraw the expulsion, but warned Bud that there would be no second chances. Bud's father gratefully thanked Blair, urging Bud to bow and apologize. Bud reluctantly did so. As they both left the office and returned to class under the dean's orders, Bud glanced at Blair in confusion and asked why he had forgiven him. Blair simply replied that he should try not to let his father down again. Bud nodded, feeling conflicted, and then quietly warned Blair to be careful. Phage, a powerful student with strong academic connections, wouldn't let him off so easily. Later, as Blair left, he muttered under his breath like a man on the brink, "He must be cursed." After everything that had happened today, now it was time to drag himself off to his part-time job. When he arrived at the library, the librarian hit him with a stare so cold. Blair blinked, clueless. Then the librarian hit him with the real dagger, asking flat out if he'd pissed off someone important lately. Blair, still confused, asked what that was supposed to mean. The librarian sighed, clearly tired of Blair's tragic existence, and informed him that he would no longer be able to work there, nor stay in his cubicle. He was officially kicked out. The order had come straight from one of the vice presidents. Later that evening, Blair found himself in Miss Brittany's office. She told him she'd be taking him and Isabella to the Mathematical Society for some academic exchange thing. She asked if he was free the next day. Blair, now looking like life had body slammed him repeatedly, said he'd just been evicted from the library and now had to go find somewhere to live. Miss Brittany paused, looked a little thoughtful, then casually offered that she had an empty room at her place. Since she lived alone, he could stay there if he wanted. Blair's eyes lit up. His brain immediately went off the rails, imagining all kinds of wild sitcom-level chaos from living under the same roof as his super attractive teacher. Will Blair end up tangled in sweet chemistry with his hot teacher or rise as the legendary holy mage and break free to return to his real world? Comment powerful mage if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.